The story begins with an old man named Jimmy Conlon lying in the woods, badly injured. The geezer thinks to himself about how terribly his past haunts him and wishes he had more time. Jimmy Conlon used to be the most feared enforcer in New York's criminal underworld, working for his best friend and boss, Sean McGuire. In his prime, Jimmy was called the Gravedigger for the way he handled the hitman business, as if he had been trained from the womb. But time has passed now, and Jimmy is old. Jimmy is now worn down and lives most of his nights drunk and broken. His reputation is gone, and he's a joke among the younger mobsters who work for Sean. He now lives his life barely surviving off what Sean gives him out of pity. Mike Conlon, Jimmy's son, on the other hand, lives a clean life, driving limousines for clients, boxes part-time at a local gym, and trying to raise his family away from crime. He has a wife and 2 daughters, and he doesn't want anything to do with his father or the world he once lived in. Jimmy tries to reach out from time to time, but Mike keeps him away. Sean McGuire has gone legitimate and runs a construction business now, trying to leave behind the criminal roots that made him rich, but his son, Danny McGuire, isn't interested in going straight. Danny runs drugs and lives recklessly, trying to prove himself tougher and smarter than his father's generation. About 2 days earlier, Danny set up a deal with a group of Albanian gangsters, hoping to support their business and use his father's influence to sell crack for them. When he checks in with his old man, Sean is strongly against the good stuff business. Unfortunately, the Albanians have already invested a large sum of money based on what Danny had told them, and seeing how his pops rejected the idea, they're running at a massive loss. They stop by his apartment the following night, requesting that he return their money, but Danny loses his temper and unalives them both to his apartment. Meanwhile, Mike drives his limousine through the city, working a shift that ends up connecting him to the crime. One of his passengers, a young boxer named Curtis, is supposed to meet the Albanians, but when Mike arrives, he witnesses Danny murdering them. Mike quickly realizes he's seen something he shouldn't have, but before he gets to leave, Danny notices him and identifies him as a witness who can expose him. Although Mike and Danny are slightly acquainted, he doesn't want to risk his cover getting blown, so he tries to silence him. Danny manages to escape, and he arrives home and makes his wife and daughters hide out at a friend's place. Danny eventually traces Mike back to his neighborhood and tries to locate his house, determined to unalive him before word spreads.
Must have been what, summer 71?
At the same time, Sean and Jimmy are having dinner, discussing old times and how much life has changed. Sean still respects Jimmy despite their fallout, but he's trying to keep his business legitimate. Later, when he gets back home, Jimmy receives a call from Sean, who informs him of the whole situation, as Danny had reported it to him already. He immediately grabs his Glock heads there. When he arrives, Mike doesn't want to let him in, but eventually gives in when Jimmy tells him he can help him out of the whole mess. Mike gets agitated, ranting about how his father had ditched him all his life, and all of a sudden is now seeking redemption. During their discussion, things escalate, and Mike tells Jimmy he doesn't need his help as he sends him out of the apartment. Around that exact moment, Danny arrives and sneaks in to end Mike, but Jimmy catches on quickly and puts a bullet through his neck, ending him instantly. Jimmy then immediately calls Sean and informs him about what he just did. And Sean tells him to brace up, because they both know how things are going to end from there. Mike, however, is stunned to see how composed his father is, standing over Sean McGuire's son's corpse. He tries to call the cops, but Jimmy advises him against it.
My house! Get out of my house!
He then sends his father out yet again and proceeds to call them. When he reports the crime as self-defense to the cops, they arrive at his house and, surprisingly, arrest him. The cops then cook up an imaginary suspect and report it to the station. That's when he realizes that the cops who arrive might not be real cops. While they take him away, Jimmy, who is aware of the whole drill, watches from a distance and then follows to intercept. He chases down the cops and eventually crashes their car and freeing his son. Together, they escape into a nearby train station, where a group of undercover agents lies in ambush for them. Due to Jimmy's son alive and experience as a hitman, he hands each of the agents their butts on a silver platter. Meanwhile, while Mike tries to navigate his way through, he sees a bunch of cops in the area searching searching for them, so he hides himself carefully until he gets into a train. Jimmy then shortly joins him, and they both head towards somewhere more secure. On the way, Jimmy explains more about Sean than Mike knew. He tells him that turning himself in is not going to help because Sean's connection runs deep in the city. Worse still, he's going to come after his family and all his loved ones, until there's no one left to destroy, and the only way to stop him is by putting an end to him first.
This way.
When they arrive in a safer area, Jimmy breaks into a car and hands it over to Mike, telling him to use it to find his family and possibly take them somewhere secure. At Mike's friend's apartment, where his wife and daughters are hiding, they see a breaking news report about Mike and his father. The media labels them both as highly wanted fugitives, falsely claiming that they murdered not only Danny McGuire, but also the Albanian gangsters. The reports brand them as dangerous criminals, escalating the manhunt.
5 years I've been chasing this son of a bitch.
Detective Harding, a veteran NYPD officer who has chased Jimmy Conlon's crimes for years, learns about Danny's death and starts looking into it. At first, he assumes it's another gang-related hit, until evidence points to Jimmy's direct involvement. Shortly after, Jimmy calls him unexpectedly, asking for a private conversation. To Harding's surprise, Jimmy pleads with him to help his son get out of the situation, insisting that Mike is innocent. Jimmy promises to turn himself in afterward. Though skeptical, Harding eventually agrees, seeing a rare chance to bring Jimmy in peacefully. Mike arrives at his friend's apartment and tells his wife, Gabriella, and his friend about what really happened. They urge him to explain everything to the police, insisting that the truth will clear him, but Mike tells them he already tried, but it doesn't matter. Sean McGuire wants him dead, the same way Jimmy unalived Sean's son. Realizing they're in danger, Mike urges everyone to pack their things and prepare to leave immediately. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door and Mike freezes. Recognizing the sound of trouble, he quickly leads his wife and daughters upstairs to hide, while his friend, whom we'll just call Mark, goes to answer. Two armed hitmen burst in and begin tearing through the apartment, searching every room. Mark tries to cover for them, claiming he just had a few work colleagues over, but the men don't buy it. They continue to ransack the place, opening doors and checking corners. At one point, they nearly find Mike's family, but one of the hitmen gets a phone call. After listening briefly, he signals the others to retreat, and they leave the building without saying a word. Meanwhile, Jimmy takes a cab and heads to a restaurant to meet with Sean. When he arrives, both men sit across from each other in tense silence, ignoring the fact that they are now enemies. For a moment, they reminisce about their past, the years they spent running the streets together and the loyalty they once shared. Then the conversation turns serious as Jimmy pleads with Sean to do whatever he wants to him, including freaky things, but to let Mike go. Sean refuses, coldly telling him that he intends to make Jimmy watch as he unalives his son before unaliving him too. Jimmy warns that if Sean won't back down, he'll expose all of his criminal connections to the NYPD, but Sean tells him he's delusional and that he was the only person who ever cared about him. Not until the moment he unalived his precious little boy. When Jimmy tries to leave, several hitmen waiting inside the restaurant move to stop him, but he escapes swiftly through the kitchen and cuts through a nearby hockey arena before disappearing into the night. Later, Jimmy arrives at Mark's apartment where Mike is waiting. He tells Mike to take his family to a remote cabin deep in the woods, a place where they'll be safe from both Sean's men and the police. Mike immediately prepares his wife and daughters for the trip, but to Jimmy's surprise, he refuses to go with them. Instead, he tells Mark to drive them there while he stays behind to help his father finish what they started. Jimmy tries to convince him otherwise, but Mike is resolute.
He was with me in the car at Danny's house. He saw everything.
After Mark leaves with the family, Jimmy and Mike get into a car and head toward another location. On the road, Mike lashes out at his father, accusing him of being an irresponsible parent who abandoned his family and left them to suffer after promising he was only stepping out briefly to get milk. When Mike finishes, Jimmy admits he made many terrible choices, but leaving them wasn't one of them because he only did it to protect them from the danger his criminal life brought. He tells Mike that even though he wasn't around, he watched him grow up from a distance and is proud of the current nonchalant and majestic man he has become. Elsewhere, Sean grows increasingly frustrated by his men's repeated failures. Determined to end things once and for all, he hires a professional contract killer named Andrew Price, a highly skilled assassin who specializes in tracking targets with precision technology. Price initially demands a high fee, but when he hears that the target is Jimmy Conlon, he accepts the job for free. Sean then instructs him to make sure Mike dies first, before Jimmy. Jimmy and Mike arrive in a quiet suburban neighborhood looking for a young boy named Legs, whom Jimmy trains as a boxer. They go door to door, checking multiple apartments in the same building until they finally find the right one. But Legs isn't home. Mike leaves a message with his brother, asking him to tell his sibling they stopped by. Before they can leave, several police cars pull up outside. Someone in the building must have reported suspicious activity. Officers begin sweeping through the hallways, ordering everyone to evacuate. During the rush, one of the residents forgets to turn off her gas stove while cooking. At the same time, Andrew Price arrives, and determined to finish the job before the police interfere, he infiltrates the building through a side entrance. Silently, he moves through the stairwells, taking out a few officers along the way to avoid being detected. When Price enters the apartment building, he shuts down the power supply, plunging the entire place into darkness. With his night vision goggles on, he moves silently through the corridors, eliminating anyone who crosses his path. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Mike see the sudden blackout as an opportunity to escape, so they immediately sprint through the smoky hallways. However, the fire from the leaking gas spreads rapidly, triggering a massive explosion that sets the whole building ablaze and sends residents fleeing in panic. While trying to make their escape amid the chaos, Jimmy and Mike suddenly come face to face with Price. Recognizing his old enemy, Jimmy immediately tells Mike to run, knowing exactly how dangerous Price is. He then confronts him head on, and the two men begin their brutal fight. Price gains the upper hand. However, Jimmy, driven by desperation, uses a series of underhanded tactics and clever maneuvers to keep himself alive. Eventually, Price regains control of the fight and corners Jimmy. Just when it seems like Jimmy is cooked, Mike, who was supposed to have escaped, reappears and points a gun at Price, ready to pull the trigger. However, Jimmy stops him, refusing to let his son experience the sensational feeling of taking a life. At that exact moment, the police burst into the burning building, forcing the Conlons to retreat and leaving Price behind in the smoke and flames. As they attempt to escape, they run into Detective Harding, who offers to help them. However, before they can act on his plan, other officers begin firing, forcing them into another desperate retreat. During the chaos, one of the stray bullets hits Jimmy, leaving him wounded. He then leads Mike to his brother Eddie's place for treatment. At Eddie's home, Mike immediately senses a certain hostility in the air. When he asks about it, Eddie reveals a shocking truth that Jimmy once unalived his cousin Billy years ago under Sean's orders. Eddie warns Mike not to trust his father, saying that no matter what, Jimmy always finds a way to destroy the people closest to him. Mike is devastated by this revelation, especially since he had always been told that Billy was unalived by gangsters. Learning that it was his own father who pulled the trigger breaks him completely. In anger and disbelief, he grabs a set of car keys and drives off to the cabin to reunite with his wife and children. Meanwhile, Jimmy, realizing how much his past is catching up with him, decides to visit his Aunt Margaret, who is bedridden at the hospital. As he sits quietly by her side, he reflects on the countless lives he has ruined under Sean's command. After some deep thought, he pulls out a pen and begins writing the names of every person and family he hurt while working for Sean. When he leaves the hospital, he calls Sean directly and warns him to stop going after Mike, threatening that if he doesn't, things will take a turn he won't like. As expected, Sean refuses to back down. He tells Jimmy coldly that he won't stop until he spreads Mike's blood like butter on a Sunday steak, making it clear that this is now personal. Shortly after, Jimmy tracks Sean to a bar, and although Sean has already stationed his men around the place, Jimmy storms in and takes them down one by one like a wolf tearing through a pack of blind sheep. Each of Sean's men falls swiftly, leaving Sean himself with no choice but to retreat into an abandoned railway site with Jimmy following closely behind. At the site, the two men navigate through rows of rusted train cars, hunting each other through the shadows. Sean manages to sneak up behind Jimmy and tries to finish him off, but Jimmy's ultra instincts kick in, and he shoots Sean in the stomach. Badly wounded, Sean staggers and tries to crawl away, but Jimmy gives him another fatal shot and sits beside him as he dies. Later that night, Legs, the kid Mike had been searching for, shows up at the police station and hands Detective Harding a video clip of Danny murdering the Albanians. Legs had accidentally recorded it earlier when he entered the limo that night. Harding reviews the footage and immediately realizes that Mike was innocent all along. Moments later, he receives a call from Mike, who tells him he's ready to turn himself in. When morning comes, Jimmy drives to the cabin to speak with his son. However, Mike doesn't seem happy to see him. Still angry and hurt, he tells Jimmy to leave because he has already called the cops, but Jimmy calmly replies that it's too late for that. Gabriella, Mike's wife, steps outside and, despite the tension, invites Jimmy in, finally introducing him properly to the rest of the family. After a short and emotional reunion, Jimmy convinces Mike to take his family to a safe distance, explaining that he doesn't want his granddaughters to witness what's about to happen, and Mike agrees. Moments later, Price shows up at the cabin, firing shots through the windows. He spots Mike and his family by the lake and begins heading toward them. But Jimmy, who has anticipated his arrival, pulls out a shotgun and confronts him. A violent shootout breaks out around the cabin, with both men exchanging heavy fire. During the chaos, Jimmy gets hit and collapses to the ground, which leads back to the story's opening scene. Meanwhile, Mike notices Price advancing toward his wife and children. Thinking quickly, he takes another route and uses his gun to fire in Price's direction, luring him away from his family. However, he soon runs out of bullets and starts running deeper into the woods, hoping to buy time. Price pursues him through the trees and eventually catches up. Jimmy, despite his injury, realizes that Mike is in danger, so he summons every bit of strength he has left, picks up his gun while staggering to his feet, and takes a clean shot that unalives Price instantly. The recoil drops Jimmy to the ground, and he dies moments later, finally at peace after a lifetime of violence. In the aftermath,
Put that gun down!
the police arrive at the scene and find the list Jimmy had written, a record of every life he wronged. True to his word, Detective Harding uses the evidence to clear Mike's name. Sometime later, Mike returns to his normal life, spending his days peacefully with his wife and daughters, carrying the memory of his father's final sacrifice.
Thank you for sticking to the end of my video. Please do me the biggest favor by leaving a like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope to see you in the next video.